Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Today I want to talk about these little creatures. It's empty, YouTube. The .38 Snub Nose. Is it still viable as a concealed carry weapon in our country today? You know, we see people out there nowadays with duty-size auto pistols for concealed carry, optical sights, extended base-placed magazines. Some of them are carrying upwards of 20 rounds capacity. Is that what we need? Or can a 5 or 6 shot capacity .38 special revolver still serve adequately? Or is someone armed with such an antiquated weapon sure to die in a deadly force encounter? That's what some people will tell you. Stick around, we'll talk about it. The Snubnose .38 Special in this country came into being in 1927. Colt. They made one called the Detective Special. This is a newer model. This is a 1980s vintage Agent alloy frame, lightweight. Basically the same specifications. Colt's D frame, which was their police positive frame. 6 rounds capacity in .38 Special, about a 2-inch barrel. A shortened grip frame for smaller grips. Fixed sights, of course. 98 years ago, the Snubbie was born. Now, Smith & Wesson, the other big U.S. revolver maker, they didn't get around to making a Snubnose until about 1950. And they called it a Chief Special. A few years later, they came out with model numbers, so it became the Model 36. Right after that was a Model 37 with an alloy frame, aluminum frame, to get the weight down even more. One big change Smith & Wesson made with their Chief Special is that it was even smaller and lighter than the Colt Detective Special, with a smaller cylinder that only held 5 rounds of .38 Special. So the thing that I think we need to talk about is the Snubnose, the classic short .38 small frame revolver, has been selling like hotcakes since 1927 in this country, and it still is today. You know, I mentioned Colt, Smith & Wesson. There are more manufacturers out there than ever. More varieties than we could accurately list, because they change every day. They're made in carbon steel, they're made in stainless steel, and a bunch of variations over the years with frames, barrel shrouds, even cylinders made of aluminum, scandium, which is Smith & Wesson's proprietary version of aluminum, that they claim is a little bit better because of a tiny, tiny amount of scandium metal that's in there, or even titanium. Now, .38 Special is the classic, although .38 Smith & Wesson was another cartridge that a number were made in. They've ranged from 22 rimfires to the .357 Magnum in the standard size frames. And in the larger frame revolvers, 44 Special, Magnum, even some Fitz models that I'll talk about as we go along in .45 Colt. The .32 Smith & Wesson long cartridge was pretty popular a number of years ago, and one advantage was you even got 6 rounds in that little J-frame Smith & Wesson that only gave you 5 with the .38 Special. There are even modern variations of the .32 with the .32 H&R Magnum or the .327 Federal Magnum that are available from some manufacturers. But I'd venture to say that probably 90% of them, especially 90% of them today, are .38s. And that is the classic Snubnose caliber. There are variations, 2-inch more or less. The Smith & Wesson was like 1 7/8 inches, so it's a tiny bit under 2. The 2-inch was the classic. There have been models made with 3-inch barrels. And actually, the 3-inch barrels have several advantages, I think. They have a little bit longer sight radius. They gain a little bit more velocity for a little bit better terminal effect. One of the biggest advantages is in the extractor rod. If we fill this with 38 empty cases, you will see that with a 2-inch barrel you have a shortened extractor rod. So when you go to empty this thing, if you just push that extractor rod up to its limit, the 38s don't clear. A little of them is still left. So if you have a higher pressure load, it's a little bit sticky in the chamber. And as you see, in a lot of them, they'll fall out on their own with light loads. But if you push, you saw that last one hang up there. So with a 2-inch barrel, when you're reloading, you want to pop that pretty good to make sure you eject those out. With a 3-inch barrel, you have a longer extractor rod. It's going to push those 38 cases out. The models that use the 357 Magnum ammo, that's even more important that you get that out. For a number of years, before they went to semi-autos, the FBI issue revolver was a Smith & Wesson K-frame, slightly bigger, 6-shot revolver with a 3-inch barrel, round butt, so essentially a 3-inch snubby, and it was a particularly nice revolver to deal with. Now, Smith & Wesson has made a number of snag-free models over the years with either a shrouded hammer with a little bit of the hammer exposed so you could cock it manually, or an completely internal hammer with a double action only kind of lockwork. Colt has never really made a snag-free revolver, but in 1953 they introduced an add-on accessory which shrouded the existing hammer and made it snag-free when you're drawing from your pocket. And that's how a lot of these guns have been carried over the years, just loose in a pocket. I think you should have a pocket holster for safety's sake, but drawing from the pocket, that could always snag on that hammer spur. Shrouding that makes it a smoother concealed carry weapon. There is a shroud available once again for these Colt D-frame models. It's available from an aftermarket maker called snubnoir.com. You have to drill and tap. And considering the collector value of some of these older D-frame Colts, I don't know how good an idea that is to modify them. But if you have one that's already drilled and tapped, perhaps you don't have a shroud. The one that's available now will fit right on there, screw in, and you'll be ready to go. Now, there was a man named Fitzgerald back in the 20s and 30s. He was a New York State trooper. He was involved with NYPD. He was a Colt rep for a number of years. And he made a unique variation of the Snubbie that they called the Fitz. It had a bobbed hammer, so it was cut off, snag-free, good for working out of a pocket. And it had a cutaway trigger guard, which I'm not sure the advantage of that. They thought it made it faster. It was certainly better if you had gloves on, but to me it looks a little unnecessarily dangerous. There were only a few of these really made by the custom makers back in the 20s and 30s, but a lot of them have been made subsequently, including some folks still making them. A lot of the originals were on the big Colt New Service frame, their biggest double action frame, and they were chambered for the .45 Colt cartridge. Interestingly, if you like the TV show Blue Bloods, Tom Selleck's character, who is the NYPD police commissioner, in that TV show, he carries a Fitz 38 Snubbie, which according to the storyline was given to him by his father, and that his father got the gun from Fitz. Kind of a neat little story to go along with it. Now, today, as I mentioned, it's not unusual to see folks on the street with high capacity 9mm. We see uniformed cops out there every day carrying high cap 9mm plus 3 extra magazines on their Batman utility belt. With extended base plates on the magazines, that can take them up to 80 rounds or so. Do they really need that much ammunition? Actually, I don't think they do, but they think they do. But here's the big difference in terms of concealed carry for folks like retired cops like me, citizens like you. Those uniformed police officers are going out every day looking for trouble. So they're taking enough ammunition with them to deal with, I think, any reasonable problem that could come their way. So you got to ask, if they need that much ammunition, can 5 or 6 rounds, maybe with 1 extra reload available, can that suffice for concealed carry in today's world? And my answer is yes. Because you're not going out looking for trouble, if you have any sense at all. A properly trained, well thought through concealed carry person today is not only not looking for trouble, they're looking to avoid trouble at every possible cost. They just want to be prepared in case trouble unexpectedly comes to them. And if it does, I think 5 or 6 rounds is enough. Even with a 5-round J-frame revolver, or Charter Arms or something like that. If you've got 5 shots, that's 2 each for 2 bad guys with a round to spare. If you hit. Now, if you plan to miss a lot, then those high-capacity 9mm Wonder 9s are probably what you need. But you know, I still see a lot of people on the range every year, especially a lot of retired cops shooting their LEOSA qualification annually. And a lot of them show up with revolvers because that's how they started their careers. I mean, we got guys 70, 80 years old out there. And when I look at the targets, the guys shooting the revolvers almost always have tighter groups right there in the center of the target. They may shoot a little slower than the people shooting semi-autos, but they're really landing hits. And if you think about a 5 or 6 shot revolver for concealed carry, chances are it's going to be an older shooter. Chances are it's going to be somebody with a lot of experience, a lot of marksmanship skills. They're going to make those hits count. And if you do, 5 or 6 plus an extra 5 or 6 in your pocket are probably enough. What about the small frame snubbies, the 5 and 6 shot smallest frame revolvers that are chambered for the 357 Magnum? Personally, I suggest you avoid them. Smith & Wesson sent me a test sample of their first J-frame 5-shot 357 Magnum revolver in the early 90s. This was an all stainless steel model. I was still a working cop, and at a departmental shoot, I was dared to fire the 50-round qualification course with that little Magnum, firing Magnum ammo. And at the time, I still lived under a statement that I had made early in my life that says, I'll shoot anything once. I don't say that anymore. So I went through that 50-round qual course with Federal 125 grain jacketed hollow point Magnum ammo. Vicious. Fireball from every shot, even in the bright daylight. I got rid of that little abuse machine, and I have never wanted another one. If you want to carry a 357 revolver for self-defense, and I think that's a great idea, get an all-steel medium frame model like the old Smith & Wesson 66. They still make a model at Smith & Wesson. That's a K-frame. They have the 686 L-frame models. Colt has a new one called the King Cobra. A lot of these are stainless steel, so you've got the weight of the steel, you've got a bigger grip to get a better handle on the recoil of the weapon. If you want a 357, fine. The idea of carrying a little 5-shot J-frame in that is abusive. And when you consider that you can get those in alloy-framed revolvers that are even, several ounces lighter than an all-steel model, they're almost uncontrollable. If you really love vicious recoil, and some people do, Smith & Wesson makes a scandium-framed Snubbie in .44 Magnum that you should just love. They also make short-barreled X-frame, the big monster guns, in .460, 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. No thanks, I'll pass on those. And I don't even think they're well-suited for bear defense myself. But hey, it's a free country, barely. You can still buy what you want. All right, what kind of ammo should you use? If you want more detailed information on ammo, I did a rundown of pistol calibers about a year ago. Go look up my 38 Special Specific, and I'll talk more about detailed ammunition info. The 38 Special Snubbies, especially the 2-inch barrels, are a little like the 380 ACP in terms of terminal performance. If a bullet expands well, it's probably going to fall short of the recommended 12 inches of penetration. If it does reach 12 inches of penetration, it probably doesn't expand that well. Now, there are some hollow point loads from several manufacturers that are specifically designed for short-barreled revolvers, which generally will reach about 12 inches of penetration and will give you some halfway decent expansion. They're usually run about 135 grain load. Most of them are plus P loadings, and the plus P loadings can generate some pretty significant recoil in an alloy frame gun, like a little 442 Smith & Wesson, or maybe this older Colt Agent. So the non-plus P versions are more comfortable. Those Snubbie specific loads, I think on my list of preferences, they would be probably my third choice. My second choice, strangely enough, is simply a wad cutter bullet. Target load, 148 grain lead wad cutter. They generally don't expand at all. These do. These are hollow base wad cutters that are inverted, loaded backwards. You got to reload to do that. They do expand out to 50 caliber or better. They tend to give pretty good penetration. But just a plain wad cutter, you've got the full 36 caliber diameter. You've got a sharp shoulder that's cutting more of a permanent wound cavity rather than shoving it aside like a rounded nose bullet or even a rounded expanded bullet. Tends to push the tissue out of the way, where the wad cutter will kind of cut it out of the way. And whenever you cut a blood vessel rather than tear it, you get more blood loss. So even though the wad cutters are very light loads, they're very accurate. They tend to hit almost exactly on to most fixed sight weapons. And they actually do a pretty decent job at stopping power. I think the best load out there in the terminal testing I've seen, and in some anecdotal reports I did in research a number of years ago, is the 38. Now these are plus Ps, but they are Federal also makes them in a non-plus P version. It's a 158 grain lead semi-wad cutter shape with a hollow point in the nose. These are very, very soft lead, so they will generally expand pretty reliably even out of a 2-inch barrel and still penetrate pretty darn close to that 12 inches or so. A lot of people call this the FBI load, and this was indeed the load the FBI carried in their 3-inch Smith & Wesson revolvers. But interestingly, I think Winchester was one of the first to load it, and if you look it up under them, they call it, their model number for that load is a 38 SPD. And it was my understanding that it was originally developed for St. Louis PD, which is just right across the river from the Winchester Ammunition Company. So I think that's the most reliable. It's going to be more on the upper recoil end, especially with the plus P models, but it's going to do a really good job. If you're recoil sensitive, stick some wad cutters in there. I think you're well armed. Whatever kind of sidearm you carry for self-defense, for concealed carry, I think you should always have at least one reload with you, just so you've got a little bit of extra ammunition. And in the case of a semi-auto, one of the major causes of malfunctions can be a bad magazine. So that way, if you carry a spare mag for your semi-auto, you can get rid of the bad one, put a new one in there. Revolvers have the reputation of being much more reliable than semi-autos, and I agree completely. There's almost nothing you can do to make a revolver quit short of bad ammunition. One thing you want to be aware of with the alloy frame, the lightest possible snub noses, is using lead bullets. Even though lead bullets are heavily crimped, especially the heavier bullets, the 158s, the recoil of that snapping back revolver can actually pull the bullet out. Now, it's not common, but it can happen. And when that bullet gets pulled out, it gets longer and longer. Now, these Colts have quite a bit of room. The little Smith & Wesson J frame is a minimum size cylinder, so if that bullet moves very far out of the case, it can actually protrude from the front of the cylinder, hit the back of the barrel, and prevent the cylinder from rotating. So if you're using plus P ammo, you're using light alloy frame revolvers, it's probably not a good idea to use lead loads like that 158 lead semi-wad cutter hollow point. A jacketed load like the Snubbie specific ones, or a wad cutter, which is real mild recoil, is not going to have that pull-out problem. That's one possible reliability issue with a revolver that you can avoid. The other thing to do is check your ammo before you use any of it. A high primer, a primer that is not fully seated in the case, which is generally a reloading problem, but I have seen some factory ammo that way. If that primer is protruding very far, that can drag against the rear face recoil plate of the revolver and make it very difficult to turn that cylinder when you pull that trigger. So check your ammo, make sure it's all the primers are flushly seated, and you're going to have a very, very reliable concealed carry weapon. Okay, that spare reload, you can do it in two ways. Speed loaders are the fastest, but they're bulky to carry. And depending on the kind of load, wad cutters in particular don't work really nice from a speed loader. You've got to kind of jiggle them around to get them lined up with the cylinder sometimes. Whereas an exposed bullet like these semi-wad cutters or a round nose or a hollow point will funnel in there very easily. The second way to carry is a speed strip. These come in 5 and 6. You can get them in virtually all the calibers. So if you've got a 44 Special or something like that, you can get speed strips to fit them. These are flatter. They're very secure. The ammunition's not going to come loose. You can go in 2 at a time, peel them off, and load that way. Another good way to carry revolver ammo, it's slower to load obviously, is a little belt pouch, and I'll show you a picture here. There are belt pouches made that will carry 6 rounds or more, and they carry them in 2-round pairs. So what you can do is, if you've been in an engagement, you've shot somebody, you put him down, maybe you fired 2 rounds and solved the problem. Now you can crack the cylinder, just ease your extractor rod up a little bit, grab those 2 fired cases, fling them out. You've got 2 on that belt pouch. You can partially load with 2 more rounds. You're back in business. So if carrying a speed strip for a full reload or some 2s in a belt pouch would give you the most versatility. The thing to remember about Snubbies is, while the gun shop commandos will tell you that you need nothing less than 15 rounds of 9mm to stake your life on, I'd hate to guess how many people in the United States every day go forth with nothing more than a .38 Snubnose in their pocket for self-defense. And in my humble opinion, they're well armed. If for no other reason, as I've mentioned, that revolver armed carriers tend to be a little older, a little more experienced, and sometimes more precise marksmen. So they can make their shots count. Now, I don't carry a Snubnose personally, and right now this is the only one I own. I have arthritis in the base of my thumb here, and double action revolvers are not comfortable for me to shoot. Pacmer or rubber grips help quite a lot, but if I go out and shoot 30 or 40 rounds of defensive grade loads from this little revolver, I'm a hurting cowboy at the end of the day. I can do it, but it's not my preference. So I tend to carry a small semi-automatic. But I've spent a lot of time in my life carrying these things as an off-duty cop or as a backup gun when I was an on-duty uniformed cop. I carried a little J-frame, and I literally wore out an old Model 60 with way too many loads that were loaded way too hot back when I was young and more foolish. But if all I had was this .38 Snubbie to go out and defend myself and my wife today, I would feel perfectly well armed. Remember the old kid's story about the little train that could? I think that's a good description for the Snubnose 38 here in the United States. It's the little gun that could. I've always loved these little things, and I got a feeling a lot of you folks love them too. Folks, if you like these videos, I ask you to subscribe, resubscribe as necessary. Give me a thumbs up. Right at the threshold of 25,000 viewers now, so I'm slowly growing, and I appreciate your support and your help. And most of all, whatever you decide to carry, be safe out there. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.